All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Thursday, June 16th meeting of the Government Operations Committee. We'll be talking about our animal control ordinance today, as well as hopefully wrapping up our discussion of the park program. But to start out, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from April 25th?
So moved.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that said, then we're going to start off talking about our animal control ordinance briefly for about half an hour, just to keep that moving through. So I will pass it over to Crystal.
Thank you. And can we make sure that we're on the review no markups?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And then we'll start out at section 4.1.23.
So as y'all know, we've spent a couple meetings going through this, and this is our third session. We're taking little bites of this every time, and so we're thankful that we're working our way through this, and Crystal set up a manageable kind of piece of this for today. So thanks, Crystal.
You're welcome. Let's see what we can get through. So this first section is kind of a total revamp of our quarantine of biting animals. Really, we took out all of the information that was really vague, and we put in based on the CDC guidelines, which can change. So you'll see in the quarantine section that it's very much refers to the compendium because as the compendium changes, therefore we won't have to change our ordinance. It'll be written to where we can make policy or procedural changes, and we won't have to do that. It does include some language for some different bite scenarios. Different animals are thought of as different in different cases. So it does include some language for that. And then obviously the general department language updates. Did anybody have any questions about that section? No? Okay. The next section is records. Again, that was a really, really easy change. We made it so that we took out the general department, or we made the general department language updates, and then we took out the written part because most of our records now are online. So it'll just be records instead of specifically written. It'll just include all records. And then it does also include the date of the disposition of the animal because that wasn't included before. Any questions about that? Okay. So this next section, we really did a lot of changes as far as most of it, even though it looks like a lot of it is just cleanup because this regulates all of our classified dogs. So potentially dangerous is a county classification, and then dangerous and vicious are state classifications, which fall under that responsible dog ownership law. So you'll see, again, departmental changes. We went ahead and updated all that language. And then we included all of the new language for, or updated the responsible dog ownership law language. So again, if that changes on a state level, we don't have to make those changes. They're already going to be in there. And then it does talk about the appeal process, which wasn't ever really anywhere formal. So now the appeal process will specifically, try to find it, I'm sorry. It's going to be on page, I believe, 19, and it's going to be 3. And then to request a hearing for an appeal, they're going to have to file a dog classification appeal request with a probate court. And we've actually been utilizing that process, and it's been working really, really well. And then the other thing is we've also added personal service. As of right now, if I have somebody's dog in classification and I'm going forward with classification, I have to physically send them in a letter. Even if they come in and I could hand that to them, I have to send it to them. So this helps us add a personal service of notice so that I can give them that letter so we can start that process even faster and get them out. Did anyone have any questions, anything you wanted to add there?
Just that particularly regarding that request, that was driven largely by the probate court judge.
Any questions? No? Okay. The next section is the authorization for TNR and care of community cats. So again, this really just gives the ability for the authorization for people to care for community cats. without owning them and without considering them being abandoned. So again, we did our general department language updates, and then it essentially would give the public permission to TNR and care for community cats. And this also does talk about the community cat and the caregiver status, which I will say, back in the definitions, a caretaker would mean any person who provides, including food, shelter, or medical care to a community cat, and a caretaker shall not be considered the owner of a community cat. So this gives us the ability for people to, which they're already doing. We all know that people are caring for community cats, but this gives them the ability to do so without having to worry about being considered the owner, and also without having to worry about being in trouble for quote unquote abandoning. And then was there anything?
Yeah, if I could just chime in on that, I think one of the things you'll notice is that we're changing the language from feral cats to community cats. And one of the big issues is that we ran into from both a public perception or a public complaint process, as well as an enforcement process, is, well, how do you define feral? What does that mean? And is there a continuum? In other words, if someone has been caring for this community of cats for the last 15 years, and everyone agrees 100% that it was a feral colony, and this person stepped up to help that feral cat colony, did the cats somehow now become less feral if they are acquainted and accustomed to that one person, but otherwise would be totally unsuitable in a home or in the shelter environment? And so this way we're recognizing that regardless of their levels of accustomedness to certain individuals, they are still community cats.
Yeah, that makes sense.
As an aside, TNR still holds the record for the most public comment.
I would believe that. I would believe that.
Around my house, I've been feeding it, so I guess it's not.
We can sign up for colony. Yeah, we can sign up for colony, and we can get you help. Did anyone have any other questions on that? Okay, so the next section is kind of an addition to that. So it kind of goes over the duties of a caretaker. And I know at one of our very first meetings, one of the commissioners brought up a really good point of, well, what is the caretaker? What should they do? So part of this goes over that. So again, general department language updates, and it defines those duties. So like if they have a sick or injured community cat, they need to try to catch it and bring it to a vet or animal services if they don't have, the funds to do that themselves. Kittens, they should be trying to catch and get altered, again, by bringing to animal services or another place where they can get altered. Receiving food and water, and then, if they're able to provide some kind of shelter, that they would provide some shelter. And then obviously if they've signed up to be a caretaker and then they stop doing what they do, there actually is a B and C kind of talk about a failure for an action to set forth. And then they could be held to, some sort of violation if they, and they can be prohibited from serving as a caretaker for a 2-year period. So therefore they wouldn't be eligible for any of the benefits that animal services would give, like the free spay and neuter vouchers, and the return of a cat at no charge if it comes into our shelter. So they wouldn't be eligible for those if they're not going to do their duties as a caretaker. So I think that is one section that it was kind of in there vaguely, but we really added some bulk there because we want to make sure that if you are signing up to be a caretaker, you understand that, what that entails. Did anyone have any questions about that? Okay. Okay, so prohibitions are just about essentially keeping the community cat safe. So like if you have a trap and you're setting it, you're not going to leave a cat unattended in a trap for an excess amount of time. You're not going to release a cat that's positive for FIV leukemia, or that's ill or injured, or that's not currently sexually sterilized or vaccinated for rabies or ear tipped, which are all things that to be a TNR cat should be, it's mandatory to have. You won't release them to any outdoor location other than the community that it's originally from, or that's being rehomed as part of an established program by us. at the Animal Services Department, which is our barn program. That's essentially how we get our feral cats out right now. And then obviously just, you're not going to interfere with any care of a community cat, be it, destroying their shelters or taking away their food or anything like that. So that section there just really helps protect, the kitties that are in the community. Did you have anything to add there?
And just that it's a real problem that we've had.
Yeah.
So that's what it's.
It's a problem of people.
People poisoning the cats, or trapping them and taking them to different shelters so that they can't be found. Things along those lines.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunately very difficult to prove, but I think there's an abundance of
Definitely.
evidence to suggest that at least in one case it was happening.
Yeah. So.
I see that like it's I think in D or like defined like a humane trap. Is that just kind of curious, like the other places like define what humane? I guess I'll worry about it also about what. I don't know.
Like a definition for a humane trap?
Just like some traps, I don't know, just being very open that people could, I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't think we define that.
I don't agree with it.
But we certainly could. I think that would be easy enough for us to put in there. Yeah, because it should make sense that it's, a drop release live humane trap.
Yeah.
I think that's, for the most part, they're the actual name of them, but we could totally, add that to it because I think that's a great addition.
Yeah.
So that way, because yes, not everybody has the same idea of what humane is. So
Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a definition for it?
yeah. No,
Easy-
perfect.
easy change.
No bear traps.
Right. Fox traps, anything like
Even
that.
making it, yeah.
Yeah. That or it does stop people also from making their own trap where they might think it's humane, but it's,
Yeah.
maybe not. Perfect. Anything else? Okay. So then 4129 limitations. This does not limit people like if you have a resident that's upset about somebody taking care of community cats and there's maybe one particular cat that's causing issues, they're more than welcome to bring it to Animal Services. It doesn't stop them from doing that. What's nice about that is we can then make sure it's got everything it needs. And then if it can't go back to that colony for whatever reason, and it is truly feral, we can work it out through our barn program. If it's friendly, we can always adopt it out. So that gives them the public the ability to have some recourse for a cat that's not working out in a colony because, not every cat's going to work out in every colony. And then obviously a limitation is not prohibiting us from going and seizing or removing community cats for public health or public safety concerns, including but not limited to the, zoonotic disease or rabies or epidemics or anything else that may come. Any questions about?
Just as an example, to try to clarify a little bit. So if a neighbor traps cat and then brings it into Animal Services, how would they ask you, like, is this a community cat or not, if their neighbor hasn't told them that they have a colony?
So hopefully they're ear notched. So that would give us a first clue that they've been TNR'd. And second, hopefully that neighbor will have a registered colony with us and we'll be able to actually call them and say, hey, we think we have a cat from your colony. We have a cat. It was, dropped off on your street. Do you want to come and look at it? If it is theirs, generally, if it's the first time it's in, we usually try to talk to them about things they can do to keep the cat closer to home. If it's the second or subsequent time, then we might need to think about a different plan and maybe not reintroducing it to that colony. So, and it definitely depends on the cat's temperament. Again, some of these community cats aren't going to be mean cats. They're just going to be stray cats that nobody wants to claim. Other cats are going to be truly feral cats. So, but yeah, that would be the hope. And then did anyone else have any questions? Okay. Section 4130 is a voluntary registration program. So right now it's not really voluntary, but it is kind of voluntary because people still have to let us know that they're doing it. And right now it's like every year they're supposed to fill out some paperwork and I have to get a letter from a rescue organization, which essentially ends up being Kelly Bettinger, because there's only one rescue organization that helps that, which is the Cat Zip Alliance. So it's really, right now, the way that the registration program, it's really tedious and it doesn't really do what it's, I think, meant to do. So this, we're hoping that people will find that it's truly voluntary. Hopefully they'll, they're going to have the same form to fill out. So it just tells us information. But by doing that, we're going to be able to call them if there's a kitty cat that's in that area that they may want, or that they may be theirs. And then they're also going to get prioritized for any participation with our funds for helping for the spay and neuter. So they'll get vouchers. We're still going to continue the voucher program. This is just hoping that people won't see it as a mandatory. They're going to see it as a voluntary, and they won't be so apprehensive about giving us their information. And we won't have to worry about Kelly's part, because Kelly is helping. Like, of all the registered colonies, every single one of them is a letter from Kelly. So that part is kind of, it's not really making a lot of sense. So, did anyone have any questions about that? Okay.
We had multiple stakeholders help with this, and Kelly was one of those stakeholders that helped. So she
Yeah.
helped on this.
Okay. So this next section is going to be a new section that we are introducing. It's protecting the health of dogs and cats. So for this, it's essentially just that. So any dog or cat that was being offered to transfer, sold, any of those, any way you want to say that, they would have to meet certain criteria. For instance, on B, they would have to be at least 8 weeks old, which is really the age they should be before they're, bought, sold, or transferred. But this puts that in the ordinance. And if somebody's doing that, we're able to do something versus waiting until their second litter and going with the Georgia Department of Ag's breeding license, which is really hard for us to, it's really just really hard to pin people down with extra litters a year. This also gives us for on C, any individual offering to transfer or transferring goes over items like they have to be vaccinated for rabies if they're over 3 months. They would have to be vaccinated for distemper and parvovirus. The cat would have to be vaccinated for FERCP. They would have to be dewormed. D is have to have a certified veterinary inspection within 30 days of the sale date, which is generally, like right now, we have to have health certificates for anybody we're transferring out of state. So that's really really something that's standard on, like, most of the time when you go to a breeder and you buy a dog or a cat, you would get a health certificate. So that's something that would help. And then also this hopefully will also help us keep with the GDA guidelines, because we'll have this on record. So then if they're having more than 1 litter a year, this will help us help GDA with those records. So hopefully if we do have somebody that's having multiple litters a year that is truly violating the GDA law, we'll be able to help them, and we'll have some proof on that. I don't know, did you?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty substantial change, obviously, to our current ordinances, but I think it was designed because what we are continuing to see is backyard breeders after backyard breeders, and it is very clear that some of them, this is a form of money, and this is not a family pet that they adore that just happened to have an oops litter. In fact, one of them just flat out told me that he's like, oh yeah, I keep them until they're about 5 or 6 and I dump off the shelter. And it was just this very kind of just matter of fact description. Like there was no recognition that I might not like or not approve of that statement, which obviously is fine, different opinions, but it's that kind of attitude that we're trying to address. And so there's really not a great way for us to do it right now, because yes, there is this law that the GDA enforces, but they're very overburdened and it's very hard to prove. So this would give us some ability to approve that. And I think the biggest thing to point out is the exemption in H, which is that, if at any point someone has an oops litter and they don't want to go through all of this, all they have to do is take it to the shelter and then we will handle the animal. But it's when you're going to be going to Walmart and giving away free puppies that we know could either be abused, end up in bad homes, or just end up being breeding and causing more of a pedophile population problem. This would give us an opportunity to say, no, that is not authorized unless you've fallen through with all of these things. I don't know if that helps.
It seems like, I agree, this is a very important, section to add in. It seems like this section especially, could really increase the amount of reporting of violations.
Right.
I definitely see a lot of social media, a lot of people concerned around this kind of stuff, so.
Absolutely.
We feel we're prepared to take all that on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there will be some more reporting. The nice thing is if we have somebody that violates, hopefully we can offer them, educational materials. They can end up in front of Sherry or, whoever at court, and hopefully get some of that education so that, maybe in the future we won't have as many problems. I don't know that we're going to see a ton more, but I'm sure we will see some more. But I think we would see them anyway. I just am hoping this would be in a different capacity. Maybe this would be before they have worms so bad or parvo that we're having to euthanize or spend lots of money. We could see them right when they're 8 weeks or 6, or even before that if they just don't have an option. But I think people feel like animal services is going to turn people away with puppies, and we certainly don't. We work with the Humane Society all the time. Puppies are generally highly adoptable. The shelter's not the greatest place for them, so we try to get them in fosters or out as quickly as we can. But so hopefully this will, help us help the community, help puppies and kittens. And this is really, I think, what it's more geared towards is the younger population. So. Did anyone else have any questions? No? Okay, that's actually all I had ready because I didn't think we would get any farther.
Well, it's about 4:30.
So that was I would call it. Okay, I was pretty close.
Right.
So I think the next time we get together, we'll definitely be able to tick off a few more of our big new topics because the next couple are going to be couple of big new topics. And I know that probably at least one of them will have a lot of feedback. So that would be good. And then in the meantime, we'll add the definition for the humane trap because I think that's a great addition.
Controversial or?
Oh, just, discussion.
No more controversy.
No. Discussion. I think it'll be good.
I was going to say we're at page 16 and 29, so we're about halfway through this, y'all, just so for those of you keeping track at home how much longer we got. But
I know.
To Crystal's point, the topics that are coming up are going to be a little more discussion based and will require a little more conversation, make sure everybody's on the same page about what we're at. So.
One thing I did want to suggest adding is that anywhere that we are using he or she, him or hers, it's becoming increasingly common that people use they as the singular third person with the gender of a person is unknown. So just a quick way to also ensure that we're being inclusive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Perfect.
I guess a question on those little on the drafts. Josh, is this the same one that you emailed out?
Yeah, but you have to select the view properly. So I don't know if Cynthia want to show how we would do that.
Yeah.
So when I send it out, it doesn't come up in this form. You have to go to
review
and select no markup.
No markup.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the same document. It's just when it opens out of your email, it doesn't come up as no markup.
Yeah, it comes up with all the red and all the.
Well, I know. I think it's like my page numbers are not lining up necessarily. What you said, we're on page 16.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too because in my
Do you have the
document,
red?
wait.
So y'all probably have the red.
Yeah, we do have the markup. The markups are showing up in the markups.
Yeah. If you go select and say no markup, you'll have the same exact page number.
Yes. Okay.
Gotcha.
Well, it's okay. Yeah, I follow along with the sections anyway. So
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
I'm copy editor and creating that key mark.
I find it helpful to be able to see. Yeah.
There are a lot of words though, so yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome job.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we can move on to discuss the extension of our parklet program. Is everyone ready for that? No. And I might also sort of just pass it over to Manager Edwards to give us a high-level overview of some of the remaining topics
Right.
that we have to hit. And
Yes.
kind of round this out.
So at our last meeting, we talked through all the changes. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal.
We talked through all the changes to the current draft. And so all of those are underlined and gray shaded on this document that Gavin provided before last meeting. And so we were able to work through most of these changes and we stopped right before we got to the alcohol section. So we're going to talk about that today, but we're also going to go back and talk a little bit more about some of the questions that came up at the last meeting, which were related to barriers. We also had some further discussion about whether or not to have parklets near bike lanes. So that was another thing we need to revisit. There were some questions about ADA, and then there was some risk implications of who should bear liability. So those were the 5 things that we have left to talk about, and we hope to kind of make it through those over this next hour with the potential of bringing forward the GOC recommendation at the August vote. Cool. All right, so with that, let's first, Danny, want to come to the table, Danny? We can start with kind of revisiting some of the transportation-related questions. So one of the questions we got was related to barriers, and if you don't mind kind of recasting kind of the question. So in this ordinance, we talk about 250 pounds of pressure. So we got the question from y'all, like, what does that look like? And are we talking about something that will never be able to move? And what are we trying to do with these barriers? So Tim Griffith couldn't do this today, but he and Daniel have been talking about that question.
Yeah. So like you said, question focused on barriers. This is from Tim. He's sorry he couldn't make it, but he said barriers aren't meant to stop cars with excessive speed, only those going near the speed limit. And that's basically the statement. It's I think what we've been reading in terms of the research on some of those foundations is just that it's not meant to stop like a catastrophic event from happening. And it's a barrier to help, but there's no way to completely prevent it.
Yeah. If I recall, one of the questions that was raised in the last meeting is how do we know that folks are in compliance with the 250 pounds of force standard? I mean, we do have some examples laid out here. And I guess could lend staff discretion in like evaluating like does this seem about right? But that had been part of that discussion last time.
Yeah. My thought on that, based on what other cities have done with their parklet ordinance, is they have their ordinance, but they also have a design guide that they publish. And within there, they have, these are examples. And so as long as they're following, if we do make that maybe a next step is, here are these examples of barriers. Or if we say these are your options, then you can basically visually tell. Within those design guides, examples include jersey barriers, which if they have them, they're jersey barriers, you can tell just by visual inspection. And then there's also the metal barricades with the planters that can weight that down to keep it from being pushed over or moved. So I think those are, as long as they're following, I think that would probably be the most recommended option.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Any other comments on that?
I think the aesthetics of it is important too. I mean, you mentioned jersey barriers. I don't know if that's very, those start looking.
But they are permitted to create facades over the barriers so that, they can. So, and I guess actually a question on that. So is that then to say that they got the barrier and then something in front of it that looks nice? Or we're thinking particularly decoration of the barriers themselves?
I would say as long, it'd be good to have Tim answer that, but I would say as long as the traffic control, like reflective tape, is not
it's covered.
Obscured, then that's kind of the important part from a safety perspective is as a car, when your light hits it, you want that reflectivity back. if they were to paint the Jersey barriers in some way where it almost is camouflage, then I don't know if that's like a good idea. But in the sense of having like the metal barricades that you see during special events, if they use something like that, which link together, and then they put a planter on that, the most important part of that is that the planter doesn't move into that right-of-way traffic zone. So they need to make sure that all of those things are kind of set back from the edge of traffic flow.
Right, cool.
So.
I wonder if there could, like, I like the guide idea, but I wonder if there could almost be something like, these are the things that have already been pre-approved. And if you would like to have an option outside of these, like, then the approval must be given by home services, which would give like an incentive for them to go ahead and with one of the ones already approved, like somebody wants to get involved, but I don't know.
I think that wording would probably cover it. Would you want that to go through central services or transportation?
Or whatever would be that,
Will be a part of the application process. I don't know, Gavin, if you want to speak to how best that would flow.
Yeah, I mean, we'd still have to develop, obviously, an application for this entire ordinance. And so whenever there's a little bit of ambiguity or a gray area, but the intent obviously is outlined clearly in the ordinance, we'll do our best to clarify some of those things in the application itself. And then upon review, obviously not issue a permit until we're satisfied that that stuff is there.
Yeah, I could see some businesses like commissioning local artists to make barriers and we wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
That is an option.
But to Daniel's point, the very next bullet after 250 pounds of force is related to the white reflective bands, and if it's on the left side of the lane, get a reflective band. So we are cognizant that at night these are very hard to see, and so wanting to make sure that people recognize that they're there is really good.
Cool.
Any other barrier questions? No? All right. The next question that came up was related to bike lanes. Chair, I think you had brought up whether there should be parking near bike lanes. I just wanted to make sure there was time for that discussion.
Sure. So as I brought up last time, so we're trying to figure out the best way to manage parklets that are close to bike lanes, given some liability issues if someone was struck, how best to protect people walking in between establishments and the parklet from bike traffic. I also raised the fact that there is actually just one parklet for whom this is true, and that is outside of the National. And so for the majority of parklets currently in existence, this isn't actually an issue. So whether or not we want to continue to move forward with developing a policy that would protect that establishment or others that may arise, need use of it, or if it's best to move ahead with a generalized policy that takes into account that most establishments don't face that issue.
Option 3.
Oh, option 3. I said 2. What was the other one?
Whatever you said last.
Oh, the last thing you said? Okay, cool. Does that make sense?
What's
I know, I'm very loquacious. So 2 options that I put forward at the last meeting were to continue trying to develop a policy for how bike lanes should be handled in proximity to parklets, or move forward with more generalized policy saying you pretty much can't put one there, knowing that it will only impact a single business. Most businesses don't even have that problem.
That you can or can't.
Can't.
Oh, no.
Yes. You don't like that? Okay. So you do have an option 3. Okay.
No, I thought you had an option 3. I thought you were just doing something general, and since it's only impacting one business, I don't know if we need to have a specific.
That's what I'm saying.
It just needs.
Yes, that.
It just needs to. I don't think they should be prohibited from doing it. It just needs to work with central services to make, or whoever does the application, to make sure that
We're entering a danger zone if we don't make a policy that could be applied to any business adjacent to bike lane, because we certainly have plenty of structures that could be restaurant businesses. I mean, actually, there are businesses that have chosen to put out parklets. I mean, think of the Costa building, we were decided to lease that out to a restaurant or something. They might want to put a parklet out in front of that.
there's no bike lane here.
There's no bike lane there.
No,
It's really only Hancock and, no. Yeah, Doherty, Prince, right? That's the only one with the bike lane
I
downtown.
mean, I travel down that bike lane.
Hancock.
Several times a week. I'm trying to picture.
Hancock is the one that has the.
Yeah, I mean, it just has, it has the barbecue joint and,
Oh, Hancock, that's right.
yeah, and the National.
Right, and I even consulted the Athens in Motion plan, and it doesn't seem like there's any more planned for downtown either anytime soon.
But I mean, what's the harm of moving forward? I feel like, yeah, I feel like it is still is better to have a policy there. So I mean, heck, a future commission doesn't have to revisit this, or what's more likely, they don't remember to, and then somebody opens up and tell somebody's trying to actually open one up next to a bike lane, you know?
Yeah, I mean, say the church builds something on that parking lot. Or, I mean, yeah, there's certainly like, or actually, yeah, I mean, actually, say building something.
I could see, eventually, like Broad Street's definitely, and, there's places I could definitely see bike lanes coming in, they're still the downtown district. But they specifically.
I think it's safer to just have a policy because you don't know what's gonna happen,
So the way we drafted this and TPW worked on the bike lane allowances, it is an added complexity, but we haven't worked into this draft already, right? So what you see in the gray shading here is allowing for bike lanes, and this is how we would do it. See, it's very important that there be signage. Our biggest concern, and staff has shared at previous meetings, is anytime you have interaction between bicyclists and pedestrians, going to and from, who has the right of way, what happens if they run into each other, are people paying attention? It limits the amount of space you have. So there are some complexities, but we've accounted for it here. So if y'all are on board with that, that was just a question that came up. We want to make sure there's clarity about it. So anything else, Daniel? No.
I believe there's also a question about bike counts.
Oh, how much traffic, yeah.
So we did bike count, and this is from May 1st to May 5th. Let's see. There we go. So this is just after the twilight criterion. So that was, I believe, the 29th and 30th of April. So May 1st to May 5th, there were 108 bikes. And 34 were using the bike lane, 69 were using the vehicular travel lane, 5 were on the sidewalk. So that's a 31% bicycles in the bike lane, 63% in the travel lane, and then almost 5% in the sidewalk. So, and with that, the thought is the bike lane is not a mandatory usage situation. We always encourage cyclists to bike where they feel most safe. And so, in talking to some people who are regular cyclists, they mentioned that when they're going straight or left in that area, they don't necessarily like to be in the bike lane and then try to cut across over to the left turn. So it makes more sense for them to move over from there. And then it could also be that in this specific spot, that's also the location with the national, and it might just be that cyclists don't really feel safe with the parklet there. So, it's really interesting data, and I think it's really helpful. And I always get really excited about being able to actually have some stuff to look at for after something's been installed. So
cool. How's everyone feel about that? This section here, pretty good. Patrick, are you there? All right, well, I just want to make sure we weren't
He's there.
leaving him behind.
He's on. Patrick, can you hear us?
All right. I think this sounds good. And then did you want to talk about the ADA?
Yes, please. So
Yes, I hear you. Sorry.
Here he is.
Volume down this time. Look.
Now we
I'm terrified. Yeah, you're probably menacing.
We do now know how to turn down the volume, so we figured that out. So there was a question from the chair last meeting about if we had talked to any residents about ADA access and run these ideas by the residents. And Daniel has done some research. We have not had the opportunity to have a meeting and discuss. One of the things we're thinking of as staff is we need a broader conversation. So we are wanting, we've talked with our inclusion officer, Sam Gardner, we are wanting to have a broader conversation about this. Our question really is a parklet where we want to start, or do we want to have a broader conversation and eventually work through all these different instances like parklets is one example. Daniel, do you want to add to that?
yeah, well, I was hoping you could maybe speak to this.
As far as ADA, we're all asking for access to the
parkway itself, being able for a disabled person to access the parkway as, everything we're asking for is minimal. Just, around, if, but they can't parkway. That's plenty things above you.
And I think,
What that is, right?
right, and I think the goal here is that, I think it would be a really good conversation to speak with, advocacy groups to see what can we do better. But we feel like maybe since this is ordinance referencing ordinance, it might be best to fit within the constraints of what ADA is currently requiring.
Yeah.
And reference that first. That way it can be, if that ordinance changes to be more accommodating and inclusive, then this is referencing that as well.
Yeah, and I spoke with Manager Edwards earlier today about, perhaps if we pursue some sort of unified and broad policy across, the government with regards to a higher standard than ADA, in future, then being able to reference that here, since we don't really have something clear to point to with regards to, established precedent. So I would be happy with going with this here. Does anyone else have any input or questions, comments?
The only other thing I saw, I think it Wisconsin, I think, has a parklets and the American with Disabilities Act info sheet they have for theirs. And I mean, basically covers what we were talking about, the gaps. But the one other thing they have there is just, which I think is something we just, ensuring that the tables being used in the parklets and the way that they're positioned is still accessible for wheelchairs to be able to come in. So there's a place for them to actually be able to sit, and it's not, structured in a way that it's not, the seating is not. Like, and that's this it's actually of the city of Minneapolis and also Seattle came together. But so it's just those two components that what they added. I think that's the one component that we don't have addressed.
Okay, can we scroll up real quick? Because this is E under the bike lane allowances. So that specifically, this is in reference to ADA access across that raised table. If we scroll all the way up to the ADA section, that would probably be the best spot to discuss that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the only other things that are not covered in ADA here that were added in, gutter allowing for stormwater conveyance. I think that's a fair point. If there's some verbiage that we could pull from them to add in here.
It's like I found the Wisconsin Department of Transportation.
Yes, it could be that does fall within number 1. Agrees to fully comply with all the requirements of ADA as directed by the fire marshal. And within there, I would imagine it would have some conversation about that. So it may be that we don't need to actually add language, and that would be covered there.
Because I can see I know some examples where that's a problem.
Yeah, like some of the using the like structured picnic tables in a way that are.
You can't pull a chair up to them.
Yeah.
Or you don't.
Right, there's no way to get in there, so this will at least happen.
I think 2010 ADA federal guidelines already.
Okay.
Added.
And maybe.
Would be unnecessary.
And maybe they just need something that can be clarified in the application.
I was going to say, I mean, the way we anticipate this application with all of the requirements now that are in this ordinance is filing an application, and then essentially with the departments that are involved, whether it's the fire marshal, transportation, public works, central, sort of routing that application around along with a plan of what the parklet will look like and getting approval by individual departments before we issue a permit.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
For the next thing we wanted to discuss, Attorney Austin, actually, we're going to talk a little bit about the risk and the liability associated with apartments and who should bear that liability.
Right, so at the last meeting, I believe it was Commissioner Parker that raised the question about whether we could require restaurants or parklets to assume that liability for any potential accidents that arise out of the restaurant's use of the parklet. I did some research and I did speak with safety and risk, and our office would advise that we can require them to, one of the restaurants to list ACC as an additional insured on their general liability and excess coverage insurance, and that would offer some protection for ACC. And I imagine that would be part of that application process. We'd be working with the restaurant to make sure that all the necessary insurance requirements are met.
So you're saying that we can require them to have liability?
Yes.
Okay. Thoughts on that?
Don't disagree. I'm just wondering because that can be, somebody needs to have liability, but is it cost prohibitive? Or that get kind of expensive for some of these? It doesn't really cost much to add additional insurance.
Right. If they already have to have liability insurance for their establishment.
It's pretty simple, but
Yeah.
the second one, as you mentioned, additional insured and.
So safety and risk advised that we would, that the restaurant should list us on their general liability insurance and our excess coverage.
Just list us on both.
Yes.
List us on it.
Yes, list. County.
See that one.
Okay?
Sure.
All right. Okay, have any questions on that? We're good?
No.
Okay. All right, so the last section that we didn't have time to talk about, Deputy Chief Harrison Daniel had worked on making changes to the alcohol section. He can't be here, he's in training, but we do have Captain Addison, Lieutenant Basinger with us, so we appreciate y'all being here. So in previous drafts, we had discussed putting green paint on the sidewalks. As we went back and, we're thinking about all these beautiful fresh sidewalks we have downtown, we thought, green paint might not be the best idea. And so we were coming up with other options, and this is one of those options that Deputy Chief Harrison Daniel came up with. And so as we go through this, let's just walk through this to make sure everybody's on the same page. And y'all, if you want to come to the table, all three of you, y'all got room to come up to the table, but you don't have to. Okay, all right. Stacy, you're good. Y'all are good over there. But the key here is, how are we able to differentiate? Because what we want to make sure is that patrons are going from the establishment into the parklet. Right. So the great thing about the green paint was it was a clear delineation to see if someone's actually walking down the sidewalk or just hanging out where they shouldn't with an open container. So what this idea is saying is we would, and again, this is not ideal, but we would affix something on the door and something on the parklet so that there could be a line of sight of what that direction would be. So I just wanted y'all to have time to kind of look through this. I don't want to read this line by line, but I want to make sure everybody kind of looks through this to make sure this makes sense to you and we answer any questions you have. So and if you go down to B5, the boundary where beer and wine is permitted shall extend from the direct sight line between those reflective markings on one side of the establishment to the parklet. And then at any establishment, and 6, any establishment of a patron who is in possession is traveling between that is within the designated space. Are there any questions, y'all? Captain Epps or Lieutenant Baser, anything you want to add?
So essentially, we're talking about fixing some sort of reflective material on either side of the entrance to the parklet and either side of the ingress, egress of the restaurant. We kind of chatted briefly about it, and I'm not going to come off Lieutenant Baker. He's the current commander. I was down here for 7 years. And my first thought is maintenance and installation, who bears the cost? And now as I'm sitting here listening to discussion, is it really needed? Do we need some sort of extra installation to identify a straight line? I think if you position it as a straight line across the sidewalk to it, I think most of us are intelligent enough to figure out a straight line. I don't understand the need to place an additional burden on the business and also an additional burden on police to identify you're not in compliance with this ordinance I think simply stating in plain language, straight here, straight there, I think you're good,
Okay,
in my opinion.
well, the PD,
I'm not.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
I mean, this was something that the police department recommended. I'm okay if we don't have anything,
Right.
but what we're trying to do is give you all the tools to be able to make that decision in the field. So,
Well, when I say that, I wasn't here for Deputy Jan, you know, and I'm sure you had his reason for it, and it does sound like a cool idea, but I think about how things work in practice, having worked that thing. And you need to make it as simple as possible. My goal has always been to make every interaction with the community and the businesses as positive as we can. And every time we show up, you're doing something wrong, that defeats the purpose. And the simpler we can make these ordinances and the easier for compliance, I think it's better for everybody involved. That's my opinion for being downtown. I welcome Lieutenant Basinger's comment that I don't see where the reflective tape serves any real purpose other than additional burden. Okay. I concur.
Yeah.
good?
It definitely seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna just chime in to say that I was not involved in the reflective tape discussion, but I was involved in the discussion of the green paint or some other things, because I think we're going to find that this is going to be a nightmare for enforcement. Because I can 100% appreciate the position that we all know what a straight line is. But when we're talking about people who are intoxicated, when we're talking about trying to enforce that, it's gonna be a whole lot of fighting with folks of, oh, well, I was just stopping for a second, or I took this slightly curved line. And then we have a problem of the fact that our ordinance could potentially be considered vague. You know, what is a straight line? And especially if we're talking about one of these large open parklets, is it a straight line here? Is it a straight line here? Is it a straight line there? And so I just caution the fact that I realize this is easier, and I know that that's what we all want to achieve, but we're dealing with alcohol, we're dealing with patients in the public. I worry that if we have nothing, that we will not be able to enforce this.
The green paint idea, was it just like maybe like 2 lines?
For like a travel lane.
Right, and the reason that I came up with it was because we talked about the idea of creating basically like open container free zones, the idea that the parklet is a zone and this walkway is a zone. Because then the question is, okay, what if this person is legitimately has full intention of walking straight there? So then they get stopped by their friend. Yeah, they're having a tough time. Or they get stopped by their friend who suddenly sees them and they're standing there talking to their friend, and maybe they move to get out of the way. I just think there's gonna be a genuine lack of clarity of the seriousness of this obligation on the patrons who are attending this, because we are talking about alcohol laws. You know,
Are the penalties or particular issues spelled out well enough where the establishment and folks working there understand how serious that is?
well, it's gonna be for the patron. It's gonna be an open container violation, which in fairness.
Right. And so if staff were like aware of what the issues could be for their patrons, they might be a little more vigilant, letting them know, like, you really gotta just go out there.
So maybe the verbiage on the sign should be more forceful. Like it says the possession of open alcoholic beverages beyond the time is prohibited, just say something like.
It's subject to like what the penalty.
Well, and a direction saying, please take your alcoholic beverage directly to the parklet. Because when you have these like legalese language, people tend to ignore it. But just when you give them a direction, go to the parklet now with your beer.
Does number 6 still call for the green markings? The possession of alcohol beverage beyond the marked pathway.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may offer an additional comparison, just while we're discussing this, we deal with a similar situation now. We've done it for years with cafes. You have a steel fence. It should be extremely obvious of where you should go. The police approach has been behavior-based, reminding people to get back in the cafe. The first step in that enforcement mode is information and education. Oftentimes we refer the drink out. Only when they become belligerent and disorderly would we take any genuine enforcement action. We've done that for years, but we deal with that conflict already. And we prefer information and education prior to any enforcement.
And I think the businesses have a sign up that say you can't take
Well,
alcohol.
they have to by ordinance. They have to have that sign posted. So I completely understand what Ms. Hines is pointing out. I get that. And I don't disagree with her whatsoever, but my perspective is how do we enforce it and reduce the conflict between citizens and the police and still achieve the same goal? That's my interest. and make it as easy as possible. We already deal with conflict to a certain extent. And people walk out of bars and cafes all the time, and we have to remind them, hey, you can't do that. Even with the festival zones that we recently tried, people wandered out, and we spent a lot of time telling people to turn around and pour their drinks out. We wrote very few citations for that. So when you have alcohol involved in the discussion, there's always going to be that difficulty enforcement. Is how do we approach that enforcement?
Now, like, what about if the signage, like, started out saying, the consumption of alcohol on sidewalks or public right-of-ways is prohibited? And then the direction, please take your drink directly to the parklet. To remind them that it's illegal to be drinking a beer on the sidewalk, but in this case, you're on your way from the restaurant to the parklet. So, you know, get moving now. That sound a little more forceful? I mean, just if there was signage that was much more, more directional and, maybe multiple signs, you know, one directly outside the establishment and one directly in front of the parklet.
And to get clarification going back, no customers were able to take their own drinks outside the restaurant, right? It's supposed to be like they can only serve to them.
No, they're not.
It's the restaurant staff, we have to prohibit from serving.
That's the okay, so it's not
It's the other way around.
I guess, yeah, I can see the problem, like, imagine this on game days. You see
Yeah.
somebody walking out with drinks out the door.
Wandering just completely away from the rest.
Well, it's just like, you just see like, I mean, especially if you're not even from town, something like that.
You don't understand what, like, the whole deal is.
Yeah, they're already,
I feel like it's.
you're already doing that, yeah, yeah. So I mean, I it's like 2 green lines on thing on the sidewalk.
The green lines, Tim, is, I'm sorry, Chair.
No, go for it.
So we just spent $20 million on these nice sidewalks and something that's gonna be down there. And I don't know that it's necessary. I mean, they're not gonna follow the green lines anyway either. I mean, if they don't see the sign, they're not gonna.
I don't think people are going to follow directions no matter what.
Yes, projects.
I think they're gonna, yeah.
I don't think, yeah.
I think we can try our best and then hope that they take responsibility themselves to keep out in front of
Yeah, I just think, you know, prominent signage, you know, they don't have an excuse really if there is very prominent signage. Hey, and the cops have something to fall back on saying, hey, the sign's right there, get in the parklet or get inside.
So are you also saying, are you speaking specifically to whether the language should be stronger or just the number of signs?
I think both. I think there should be multiple signs, so there's no excuse that I didn't see the sign, and the language of the sign should be thoroughly directional. You know, state that it is illegal to be consuming alcohol in the public right of way, and, you know, state that please take your alcohol directly to the park. That makes sense? And maybe even put in something there about it's not legal to have glass outside too. You never know who's gonna be having a drink at the bar and then wander out to the parklet or glass. So that could be something that I mean, if we could, you know, come up with some clear, very, very forceful verbiage on the sign and, you know, assure that those signs are placed prominently in both in front of the restaurant and directly in the park.
If I may, are there other sections though of this that could still be applicable? So obviously the sign, you know, we could look into stronger language on the sign in number 6. But if we kept a portion of B, took out the part that talked about boundaries, but just said when beer and wine is permitted, the following, and I'm looking specifically at 1, that the entrance, that kind of describes the entrance of a parklet being directly across the sidewalk from an establishment. Maybe get rid of 2, 3, 4 that talk about the markings, but then maybe keep 5 and 6 with some tweaking, obviously, that, you know, again, direct sight line, and that keeps that number 6 in there, that anybody who found in possession, you know, shall not stop, stand, idle, loiter, all that stuff. And then we've still got C and D, that the permittee, meaning the business, is responsible for educating patrons as they can. And that anyone caught, I guess, with a history of 3 or more open container violations, you know, could be banned from having is that still acceptable?
I think so, but.
Sure, oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
But you're gonna strike all that reflected markings.
Yeah, so I'm specifically saying take 2, 3, and 4 out all the way. And then in, some of those other sentences like B, number 1 and number 5, where it maybe does talk about the reflected, we can kind of cross that part out and make it.
So directly across from the entrance thing, I wonder if there's any conflicts there that would end up prohibiting certain businesses from having parkers if, say, there's a tree planted there or an electrical box or.
Is there an example you think of?
I can't, I mean.
It could be like, or as near as practical.
Yeah, like we could make it a little broader or as near as practical.
Okay.
I have one other solution that is probably not palatable. It just occurred to me, maybe one option could be that they sell you, well, this is the problem. I just don't know I don't know about the alcohol regulations, but I was wondering if it's possible for them to sell it to you unopened. I think they have to open it.
Yeah.
I was thinking like it would be great if you could. Yeah, sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, retail package, so.
Yeah.
So these lawyers just don't want us to drink
I
it.
know.
They're right. They're probably right, I'm sure.
The one thing with the signage, I guess I do get, this is something I'm gonna fix today, something to bring up. That if we have, say, restaurants that have a patio, a cafe, and also a parklet, they're gonna have multiple signs, like, that can be kind of weird and confusing. It might be good to have something that was streamlined and be used for both instances.
Well, they're not required to have a sign for a patio because that's an adjacent space, right?
No, they are. That's what we were saying. So there's a thing, I was saying, like, it might be just good to have, I think you can easily put these things together where it's consistent language about where you're allowed to go, but.
So you're good from consolidating into a single sign, that sort of gives
Sounds
sound.
kind of like they are right now.
I'm confused. When you say patio, or do you mean sidewalk cafe?
Sidewalk cafe.
Yeah.
That was a place that had, they'd be required to have signage for both, right?
There-
Sign?
Sidewalk cafes aren't required to have signage because they're,
It's inside the business.
yeah, inside, but not on the outside.
Yeah. I was thinking that, I mean, I guess going on with Mr. Lynn bringing up, but more signage, that would make sense to have a sign as, same thing, right? When you're leaving the thing, they have giant thing like walkers, when you're going out the door, there's a sign there, which is helpful. Like you literally have to look at it as you open the door. Might be helpful to have something for parklets.
I mean, it might be helpful if we provide the sign, just to assure that everything is standard and. I mean, it's just so that it's crystal clear that, these are the regulations, no matter where you go, up and down the street, this is what you need to do.
Like anything else? I feel like we have a lot of different options out here. And so I might ask for someone to make a motion to a certain end so we can sort of decide which course of action to go with and move forward. Does that sound amenable to people?
I think we're all.
Are we all for
But, yeah,
I think-
yeah, running of striking the.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
get the reflective markings out of there.
Signage.
And then any additional language regarding signage?
Yeah, I mean, I could come up with something if you want me to throw it out there.
Sure, so yeah, so specific language we'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the only thing that's kind of indicative, like,
Get the lawyers.
Yeah, let's get the lawyers.
yeah, let's get
So-
together and we can work on the signage.
Attorney Hines, if you feel comfortable capturing some of what Commissioner Lynch has brought up here in some language.
Yeah.
On signage.
Yeah, I think I would let Austin do that, but okay, just because I think this has been his project more than mine, but yeah.
Okay.
We can do that.
Great, thank you. Okay, cool.
Commissioner Davenport, just wanted to check on, is there any questions you had?
Nope. Everything looks good. Well, everything sounds good so far.
Okay. Great.
Any other questions from staff, before we?
I'm not trying to add more things to the plate as I think about this. I'm interested in, as it compares up to our open container ordinance, is there going to be an impact on that on transit? Any language talking about stopping, standing, pausing on public space while transitioning from one permitted area. Right? It's been a couple of years since I've read the entire open container ordinance, but I would be curious if there's anything that we need to note in that. It's ordered for the other one to make sure that we're covering that transit mode if that alcohol service coming from the main establishment out to the park.
Captain, does I don't know if you can read it from there, but 6 talks about, shall not stop, stand, idle, loiter, sit, or otherwise cease movement to either the establishment or the parklet.
Yeah, and that's what made me think
Okay.
about the actual home containment.
Okay.
How does that correlate with that? Is there anything that we need to note in that at all? If not, if the attorneys say no, they're smarter than I am when it comes to that. I just want to make sure from the police perspective, we don't have a loophole there or some point of contention if we have to go to court.
So, oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna say that I think the original intention was that this ordinance would create a carve out of the of everything that specifically is for purpose.
Thank
Okay. Yeah.
I think,
At the end?
y'all, yeah, if y'all are good, that was the last thing we had to talk about.
I have something that I noticed, in, 622-9 in the management section. It talked about sound, and we talked about amplified sound being prohibited. And it occurred to me recently that amplified sound is not prohibited in our outdoor sidewalk cafes. And an establishment could get around this by amplifying sound in their sidewalk cafe loud enough to reach the parklet, or by setting up amplified buskers on the sidewalk, because we don't really regulate that either. I just feel like we really need to return to our amplified sound ordinance in general. But I mean, that's kind of outside of this, but I see like a clear opportunity for any place to totally get around that. There's kind of a band war going on downtown, sort of, I mean, between Paloma Park and other outdoor sound, like, I've had complaints about competing live music outside.
That's
No, I'm just talking about like outside amplified noise sound competing against each other.
I think the bigger concern is just like you would want to have amplified sound like on the street next time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking like, I mean, we are having issues with amplified sound. There's street preachers that are interrupting kids getting their graduation pictures taken, there's street preachers harassing, and there are complaints from businesses about it. And I just feel like this is an opportunity, not necessarily in this ordinance, but it brings up, the fact that we don't regulate this downtown, and, it could be, and we are regulating it within these little spaces, but it's not regulated downtown.
Lieutenant wants to say, we do regulate it, but it has to apply to the normal.
Yeah, that's the thing. We
They
don't.
have an outdoor speaker and it's not normal horse business, and that speaker would fall under the regular. So like 100 feet out. So we do enforce it downtown, and we have enforced it downtown.
But we don't prohibit. We don't prohibit amplified, like freedom of speech.
The only section that would be for amplified is there's one section for very. But it's very, very vague.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Typically, we typically just fly under, because the amplification is tied to a special permit.
Yeah.
Ordinance, and that might be something that something like as far as taking out or adding an amplification section, period, that's not tied to special permits.
Yeah.
That's beyond the scope of this one.
Yeah, it is beyond the scope of this. I just want to bring it up because it's beginning to be a real issue. I'm getting complaints from businesses downtown about competition and overflow from nearby businesses for their patrons.
This looks good. Y'all put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, this is awesome. I mean, does anyone else have anything additional they'd like to ask or add?
I'll make a motion that, we send this as recommendation to the full body for mayor commission with, the changes, again, brought up with the reflective stuff. And with,
About the signage from.
and with the additional sign, blameless.
Second.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Nice.
Awesome.
Thank you all so much again, staff, for your expertise in this matter. I'm really excited that we go.
Can I bring up one really quick thing that
Yes.
might require a quick vote that's just annoying? On notes, item 2, items on hold for property tax freeze, January 8th, 2019. I mean, that has gone to referendum. It's going to be there in November.
Yeah, we did.
So we still strike that.
Good catch. And one last question, are we good with keeping the typical meeting in July, which would be the 18th?
Thoughts on that? Would you like to come back to that when we kind of have more time to consult our schedule? Okay,
I'll be back in town.
Josh.
I'll be back on.
Thank y'all.
All right, so we will sort of circle around to that in the next week or so and get that nailed down, see if everyone's in town. But other than that, great job, team.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Oh.
Thanks for joining, Commissioner Davenport.
I'm gonna make the change, you know, send them to you.
Yeah.
Changes.